So welcome to the final APA webinar, I think, for spring until we go into autumn. I'm looking at Carolina just to see if she gives me the thumbs up or not. We've got Annie with us tonight, Annie McIntyre. And we were just saying that we know Annie is going to have a lot of things to share with you. And we know that you've come here to see Annie and not us. So just general housekeeping, please. If you could just keep your microphones off and if you can keep your picture on. We were just saying it's nice because then we feel like you're all out there. But I know that's not possible for all of you. So Carolina is putting up in the chat box the bio so you can read for Annie. You know, she's everyone's favorite. She does everything. And the book that she's going to be talking to you about, I've got the original one and apparently I've got to update. I won't show you my one, but I knew the book before I knew Annie. And I love it. And I love it because it tells you about the flowers. And it tells you, for instance, borage, I love borage, and it just says it brings courage, and then it explains why. And so no more from me, over to Annie, and welcome everybody. Annie.
Hello everybody, lovely to see you all. Hi Seb. I can't see everybody all at once, and I don't know how many people are here, but anyway, I thought that it's not just me that has flowers close to their heart. I think everybody loves flowers. And so I thought that we'd just start by just hearing a little bit from you guys about why do you love flowers and why do you feel that flowers are special and how are they special to you? And it would be good if you want to speak rather than put things in the chat, but don't all speak at once. Maybe just put your hand up or something if you want to say something, but it would be really nice to just kind of open it a bit and get us to kind of bring ourselves kind of into our own hearts and feel, how do you feel about flowers? What do they mean to you? Is there a flower that's particularly special to you? And then maybe some of the things that I'm going to talk about might resonate with the way that you feel.
There is a raising your hand part in the participants, so we can use that so that everyone doesn't talk at once. Who would like to start?
Manisha.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, my video is not coming up, so apologies, can't put that on. But I wanted to what resonates with me recently, which I had known about it, but this year is dandelion, and it's very grounding for me. That's what I have found. It just calms me down and it grounds me. I feel like I'm rooted. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else got any kind of feelings about flowers?
Yeah, when you say flowers, for me what comes up is like just 3 words: life, joy, and healing.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that does it all.
Say that again.
Life, joy, and healing.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, they're very joyful, aren't they? When you gaze on a beautiful flower, you can't help but feel joyful. So I sort of feel that there are many ways that we interact with flowers. And, you know, being a herbalist and practitioner, the tendency is to think about flowers for their medicinal properties, but they're way more than that. Because people grow them and they pick them and they put them in vases and they give them to people, and you know that they give something, they say something, and they say so many things. So I was just wondering really what they said to you.
I also think flowers have a very spiritual aspect, and they're used within lots of rituals and prayers within the ancient Indian tradition. So it's very spiritual too, and very sort of bringing us closer to God or the divine.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Hello, this is Eleni, and I feel the flowers bring beauty, humbleness, healing. It's a very uplifting energy, helps you to connect with your soul. Also, there's a lot of femininity in flowers for me.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with all of that, what you say. Anybody else before I start?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I love flowers also for the sort of fullness and the fertility of the time of year that it shows, and the colours when you go outside and it's a different season, and it's just so beautiful. And you know that something's coming, the kind of potentiality of it all.
Yes. Gives you hope.
Right.
Yes, like the first flowers that come out after the winter, snowdrops and crocuses and daffodils. Yeah. But you know, I think when you stop to see the beauty of a flower, you know, they say that if you recognize beauty, it's because there is the beauty in you. If you're connected to the beauty in you, you recognize it. If not, you'll be thinking about your to-do list. You know, so I think that it's something, it brings out the beauty in all of us. So in that way, I think that just gazing at flowers, you know, sometimes they say, you know, we could have, for like a rose, one gaze 3 times daily after meals. You know, just gazing at the flower is so healing because it's so beautiful and it resonates with that beauty within ourselves. And I think it brings you into that place within yourself. Thomas, have you got your hand up?
Yes, just briefly, I did journey with rose, with white rose a couple of months ago. There's a shamanic ritual where you dye it with different parts of the plants. And I spent about 4 days preparing the decoction and working with the roots, the stem, the thorns, and the petals of the rose in a different way. And it was one of the most amazing experiences to get the nuances of the different parts of the flower. So the rose petals have got a very different energy or spiritual energy than the roots or the thorns. So it was very much about protection for me, purity, but it was also about recognizing that pain is just a perception, because the thorns are being perceived as that which protects the rose, but in a way, the message I got was it's a matter of perception, depending on which level of consciousness you work with the plant essences or with the flowers.
Yes. You know, quite a lot of the flowers, we might use the stem, or we might use the bark, or we might use the root, we might use the seeds, but somehow it's the flower, the beauty of the flower, that is like the sort of manifestation of the whole plant. And it's that attracts us. And that's what attracts the pollinating moths and insects and so on. But it's actually, it's the manifestation, it's the final expression in a way before the seed of the plant. And that feels like special. It's in a way how the plant is recognized. You know, if you've just got a plant without, maybe with leaves, you might recognize it. But once the flower comes out, you go, yes, this is definitely lilac. This is definitely a rose. This is, so it's in a way, it's how that the beauty of that plant is recognized through the flower. Joanna.
I was just thinking about the smell as well. My friend Rena shared an expression, I think comes from Japan, that menopause is a time to smell the flowers, which I come back to quite often, just taking the time to be able to stop and actually smell the essence of the plant. So obviously they're visually amazing, and some flowers don't smell, but most of them do smell amazing.
That's true. That's true. And each one smells different, and each one looks different. I mean, not actually, even every rose looks different and smells slightly different. So each has got its own kind of personality or its uniqueness. Anybody else?
I would like to say that I like the wild primrose, of the yellow color, because where I grew up in the west of Ireland, they grew everywhere. And whenever I see them, I find them very refreshing, and they're my favorite flower. Mm-hmm. That might be to do with my childhood experience, or it may be something other.
Yes. Yeah. They're so sweet, primulas, aren't they? I love
Yeah.
them as well.
Yeah.
So I've got a PowerPoint as usual, and I've always got PowerPoints that are way too long with loads of information. So I shall kind of go on until we have, we have to stop. But I quite like to not wait until questions at the end. And I'd rather, I'm not very good at keeping an eye on the chat. So maybe Sue could keep an eye on the chat and maybe just stop me, because I'd rather just stop as we go along. Otherwise the question becomes irrelevant. It becomes relevant, if it's right at the end, then we lose its relevance to where we were. So I'm really happy to be stopped. And we've got an hour and a quarter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry, Thomas and I and Colette, when she comes back, we'll keep an eye, and you'll suddenly hear us or see us like this.
Okay. Okay. So let's share the screen. And put you over there. Okay. So, okay, so now my slide doesn't want to move. Okay, we tested this before and it worked, and now it doesn't. So let me stop sharing.
Yeah, stop sharing and try again. That's what Carolina, you normally say, isn't it?
Aha, there we are. Silently a flower blooms, in silence it falls away. Yet here now, at this moment, at this place, the world of the flower, the whole of the world is blooming. This is the talk of the flower, the truth of the blossom. The glory of eternal life is fully shining here. And I think that, that's all we need to say, really. We could just sort of sum up what flowers are about just in that poem. So what I was trying to bring out was that flowers are just part of our lives. They mark every ceremony from birth to death, from the cradle to the grave. And every important part of our lives is marked with flowers. So there, we've got here a picture of a marriage on the beach, which looks kind of idyllic, but flowers everywhere. And of course, the most romantic of flowers, the rose. And roses there along the ground, it was because roses used to be used as confetti, dried roses or rose petals. And roses are about, the red rose is about mortal love or sort of erotic or eros type love. And the white rose, which is sort of intermingled there, is more to do with divine love or spiritual love. But I don't think you'll find a single wedding without roses. So when a child is born, we have roses. At a baptism, like here in the church, there are flowers, not just roses, any kind of flowers. They mark the occasion. You give people flowers on their birthdays. If you go to have lunch or to have supper or have tea, or you give flowers. And any occasion that's special, you use flowers to enhance the beauty, because we were talking about beauty of the flowers, to enhance the beauty of the occasion. And we bring flowers even in winter into the house, and it brightens the house. And if you're laying the table like there for somebody special coming to dinner, you put flowers. And it's sort of, when you give flowers to somebody, it makes them feel special. It's a sort of gift from the heart. So given to sad or unwell relatives or friends to lift their spirits and speed them to health because they're healing. And that's not just taking them, that's just giving it to them and looking at them in a vase or on the table. Just their mere presence is healing. And it's not just me saying this, it's quite clearly throughout history, it's been so. And garlands and wreaths are used at funerals, and they're symbols. A lot of these flowers are symbols, and the flowers that are used at whichever ceremony are because those particular flowers have an aptness, because they have a symbol. So a lot of the garlands and wreaths that would be used at funerals, for example, are flowers that are symbols of the afterlife, or life after birth, after death, or everlasting life, or the world of the spirit, that kind of thing. And of course, like this, I think it must be Monet, has inspired artists and poets. I mean, how many poets have written about flowers because they inspire us? Their beauty inspires us. And so they give everybody pleasure. Everybody all over the world has flowers, grows flowers. And even if you live in the city, you might put them in a pot or a window box or whatever, and they lift the spirits. So flowers have been featured in our beliefs, our myths and legends, our art, our medicine, our worship and religion, as somebody said earlier. And they are, you know, something that's a symbol of human and spiritual experience, things like love and remembrance, purity and fidelity, fertility and abundance, joy and sorrow, death and rebirth, etc. They can say something that we can't say. The snowdrops here, they're a sign of hope, of course. So they're a symbol of hope because they're one of the first flowers that appears after the winter. But they're also funereal flowers because they look like the sort of the shroud that's put over somebody when they die. So a lot of people plant snowdrops on graves because they're a funereal, but they're funereal, but they're also about hope and life after the death of the winter. So that the sort of the essence of spring and life eternal is partly why they're put on graves as well. So basically, I think that flowers can say what we might be searching to say, but we're finding hard to express. And because they've been used like this as symbols of our experience, and maybe it's hard to voice that experience. There's something like love. The word love has been bandied around and it's overused. And, you know, you could say, I love my cat, or I love that picture, or I love that dress, or, you know, but actually deeply loving somebody, how do you say that? Because that word, you know, we need many more words. So they say that flowers, and particularly roses, and look how beautiful that rose is love in search of a word, and that the flowers can say things for us. They say, I appreciate you and I'm celebrating you and your birthday, or I'm really sad that you're unhappy, or, you know, I'm so happy that you're getting married. It's that we're saying something by giving flowers to people or adorning the place with flowers. So Wordsworth said, to me, the meanest flower that blows can give thoughts that often lie too deep for tears. So they express our emotions for us. Love in search of a word. So we were talking about beauty and how the beauty of the flowers, I mean, look at those amazing lily of the valley. They connect us to beauty within us, which is infinite. So they have the power, I feel, to connect us to that place of beauty and infinite wisdom and bliss and consciousness and so on within ourselves. So they enable us to become part of this infinitude through our connection with them in everyday life. But we need to be with them. You know, we need to spend time contemplating them, seeing them, being with them, gazing on them, and allowing their beauty to sort of permeate into us. So flowers touch our lives in ways that bring healing of infinite and indefinable measure. They're imbued with philosophical, religious, and symbolic meaning. They unite us to the rest of humanity because everybody loves flowers. And they've loved herbs, they love flowers now, but they've loved them through eternity. So, you know, somebody that's gazed on, what has she got there? Looks like feverfew, or daisies, or chamomile, or whatever. You know, what the ancients have said about these flowers thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, is what resonates with us now. So somehow it kind of, you know, when you connect to flowers, you realize that everybody loves flowers. So somehow it kind of connects us to everybody that's sort of gazed on those same flowers, not those exact same flowers, but that flower, you know, going back throughout history. So I think they sort of connect us to everybody else in a way. So a flower contains all the elements of nature: ether, air, fire, water, and earth. It has form, color, texture, and fragrance, as we said, and still something more, an indefinable and mysterious quality, the vibrations of something that is abstract, pure, and perfect. Maybe that's what we meant by the beauty. And it is the form behind which is pure consciousness, the sound, the all-powerful creative mantra, the word, the womb of creation. So in that way, I think that flowers, and here is the lotus particularly, has the potential, and as Thomas was saying, to connect us to that much deeper, more spiritual part of ourselves, because they're a manifestation of that. And somehow the beauty of that, of them, enables us more to connect with that side of ourselves, I think, rather than a thorn. But I may be wrong. You know, Thomas has gone more into the thorns. I'm into the flowers. For these almost inexplicable reasons, flowers are loved by men, women, and children alike, and have the power to heal us on all levels of our being. Little flower, but if I could understand what you are, root and all in all, I should know what God is and man is, said Alfred Lord Tennyson. That's me in India smelling a jasmine, actually trying to see if this pink jasmine smelt like white jasmine, but it didn't really. So getting to know flowers, how do we get to know flowers? We need to spend time with them. Every flower has its own blend of many different attributes. So, you know, as a herbalist, I'm really into and really curious and fascinated by all the biochemical constituents and physiological actions of the plants. And we'll come to some of those in a bit. And then there are what's called their energetic properties. Are they cooling? Are they heating? Are they drying? Are they moistening? Are they heavy? Are they light? Then they've got their own unique texture, their own particular appearance. I mean, there's nothing like a marigold, nothing. Each one has got its own combination of tastes and smells. And if we spend time with the flowers, it's possible for us to become acquainted with the flower, and you get to know them almost as if they're a different person. You know, I remember somebody saying, what's the Western equivalent of ashwagandha? And I remember saying, well, that's like I'm saying, what's the Indian equivalent of Sue or Thomas or me, or there isn't one. You know, and every plant is completely different. And it's hard to say what would you use instead of in its place, because each one is completely unique. And the more time that you spend with the plant, the more, and as you were saying, Thomas, that you get insights into a plant that is more than what you can read about. So since earliest times, when people lived much closer to nature than we do now, flowers were endowed with magical, supernatural, or divine properties. Well, they were endowed, and maybe we might say they're myth or superstition, but maybe they were completely right. And maybe they really do have those magical, supernatural, or divine properties. I think they do. And they were also believed to have natures and temperaments much like our own. I always loved, when I was a child, that book of the flower fairies. And, you know, each flower had a fairy that had its own sort of personality. And then the great myths, all sorts of myths from all over the world, tell us stories about how the flowers came into being. And these myths I've talked about in the book, Healing with Flowers, because all the myths that tell stories about the herbs are telling us stories that we can learn about the properties of the plant through the myths. And they're not just stories about nothing. They're amazing. You know, it's interesting. Something like Parsk flower, Anemone pulsatilla, which is a spring flower, and it's out probably now. And it's got very beautiful kind of pink and purple and sometimes white flowers that kind of hang their heads like this. And according to the Greek myths, Anemone was in love with Zephyr, the wind god. This is in Greek mythology. But Zephyr, the wind god, was married to Flora. And she didn't like the fact that he was paying attention to Anemone, and she told him to banish him to Boreas, god of the north wind, which is what he did. So Anemone was banished to Boreas, god of the north wind, to come and go at his bidding. And she was forsaken by Zephyr. So she looks forsaken. The flower is like this. And she's one of the earliest flowers that comes out in the spring when the north wind doth blow. And she gets buffeted around by Boreas, god of the north wind. But she's one of the most resilient flowers that there are. You know, even though she gets buffeted around by really cold winds, she still looks absolutely beautiful and amazing. But what's incredible is that when you start looking at the properties of an anemone pulsatilla, past flower, in homeopathy, the main in black type for anemone pulsatilla is fear of being forsaken. And an anemone is all about being forsaken. And an anemone is very, you know, if you look at a pulsatilla picture, homeopathic picture of somebody who's kind of changeable, they, you know, they change according to who they're with because they don't want to be abandoned. They don't want to be rejected. And so they're sort of a bit chameleon-like. And they seem as if they're incredibly delicate, but actually they've got this massive resilience, which the past flower has. So when you start going into the myths, you realize that the myths are telling us stories about them that actually we can learn about, and they help us to remember how you can differentiate one plant from another. And then you start looking at the properties of the flowers and how the flowers can be used. It doesn't matter whether it's in homeopathy or in herbal medicine or as a flower essence or whatever. The essence of that flower comes through them. And you can see why these myths were told, because their properties are coming out through their use in medicine. It's very exciting. So human life in olden times, as now, was seen as imbued with a divine spirit. And similarly, flowers were also seen to have an indwelling spirit or a soul, which determined their shape and their form, the way that they grew, their taste and their smell, and their purpose in the world. And there's something called the doctrine of signatures, which, you know, it was a medieval idea that God in his wisdom made a flower look in a certain way or smell in a certain way, or give us, it had characteristics, the doctrine of signatures. It had a signature to tell us mortals here, how best to use these plants. It was giving us ideas, giving us clues about how these plants could be used in medicine. So for example, this is heart's ease, and it looks like a heart, and it eases the pain of separation from loved ones. It's a heart's ease. That's why it's called heart's ease. And actually, if you look at its medicinal properties, it lifts the spirits and gladdens the heart. It's a sort of cordial remedy. And, you know, things that have yellow juice, flowers that have yellow juice like greater celandine, are liver remedies because bile is yellow, and so on. So in the ancient wisdom traditions, flowers and their particular prana or chi were seen as manifestations of the conscious intelligence of the universe, each one with its own particular subtle intelligence or wisdom, its own life force, its own attributes, which give it its energetic properties that we talk about in Ayurveda, as well as all the different biochemical constituents and its potential to heal. So this wisdom that is embodied in the plants is imparted to us. There they are. We've got them if we just knew about them. And we're actually we're using them in healing without even knowing about it, just by bringing them onto our dining room table or taking them to our friend for their birthdays. We're using them for healing. But they have this wisdom, this subtle intelligence. If we take them into our being, that resonates with us. And you know, the trick in medicine, the trick of being a practitioner, is to find the plant that resonates with yourself or resonates with the patient. And so we need to spend time with the plants to see what resonates with us, what resonates with other people. And they have the ability to reconnect or realign us with the conscious intelligence of nature that we're part of and bring about healing. And they really are. Everything in the plant world really is an extraordinary gift. So every plant, as I was saying, you know, maybe through the doctrine of signatures, the way it looks, the way it smells, the way it feels, is telling us something about its properties, its healing abilities. And, you know, going back in history, before the days of microscopes, all that we had through discover these properties and to rely on to discover what was healing for us was our 5 senses. And then, you know, like in Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, Unani, Tibetan medicine, and so on, plant medicines were classified according to their effects on our 5 senses, because that's how we interacted with plants and flowers. And this was the foundation of the energetics of the ancient wisdom traditions of medicine. And people think that it was in the olden days that we used our 5 senses to connect to plants and resonate and find out what they were for, and that we've lost that ability, and we have to use our microscopes and science and so on to tell us what plants can be useful for what. But actually, I know from experience, from my own and having, you know, groups here at the house, that if you send people out into the garden and tell them to go and sit with a plant for half an hour, pick it and bring it back, sit in a circle and tell us what that plant is for, they know. We all know, we've got a deep knowing that's ancestral within us. But we've got our 5 senses as well that can tell us, you know, we can taste and we can smell and we can touch and so on. So our senses can still serve us very well, but we need to spend time with them to develop a real sense of their healing potential. We have taste, smell, sight, and touch to interpret the messages from plants, maybe even hearing, as the plant world may even speak to us in subtle ways. And I remember somebody who I still see, who said to me one day, Annie, is it normal to hear plants communicating with you? And I said, I don't know about normal, but I would say it's lucky. You know, certainly we can hear the different notes of plants as they rustle in the breeze, and every plant, every flower will sound different. And also we have the mind. So there's a word, it's now called organoleptics. It's a scientific, well-respected term for the use of the senses. So even though we've been using microscopes, thin layer chromatography and so on to see what the constituents of the plants are, but now they're still saying we need to use our 5 senses to make sure that we've got the right plant. So people in big herb companies are employing people to use organoleptics, the use of the 5 senses, to make sure that, you know, to ensure that the plant is the right identity, to assess its quality, how fresh it is. You can see, you know, you can look at a plant. If a plant that's supposed to be green and the leaves are supposed to be green and the flowers are supposed to be vibrant white or whatever, has gone to a sort of grey colour, it's lost its oomph. It's not going to do anything. So get rid of it. So, you know, we can tell so much by smelling it, feeling it, tasting it, to know whether it's the right plant or whether it's actually going to be of any value to us, whether it's still got any prana in it at all. So we can use organoleptics to taste and smell and just to try these flowers out for ourselves and see how they resonate with us on lots of different levels of our being. The qualities experienced by the senses can give us a deep sense of knowing. But to some extent, this knowing might be subjective and perhaps not to be relied on totally. So for example, if I've put that picture of somebody in a wedding dress, and so she's got apple blossom or something in the back, you know, that she's maybe got in her hair and whatever. So for her, she's going to associate apple blossom with joy and celebration and marriage and bliss and that kind of thing. So, you know, we've got our own experience of a plant, and some people will say, well, I really don't like that. But it might be that, or they have a bad reaction to it, but it might be historical. It might be some associated activity or something that happened at the time that flower was around. So it's to some extent subjective and not to be relied on 100%. So combine it with reason and experience. It's important to understand flowers, plants through the left brain as well. Their traditional use, the dosage range, the appropriate method of administration, the modern pharmacology, contraindications, herb-drug interactions, all that kind of thing. And put the two together. And as you spend time getting to know each flowering plant, you will gain a deeper understanding of its unique character that can be of help to you as you journey through life. That's a poppy in my garden. So how can we benefit from plants? From flowers? So how can we use them? Well, we talked about just being with them and all the different occasions in our lives that we can we can be healed by them. So being with them, putting them on your table, smelling them, growing them in the garden, many ways. And then you can make them into herbal preparations. You can use them as essential oils. So many flowers have been, contained. If they smell, that means that they're full of volatile oils, and those volatile oils are used in aromatherapy. A lot of the flowers are also used diluted and made into homeopathic remedies, and then floated in sunlight and made into flower essences. So there's been lots of debate through the years between the herbalists and the aromatherapists and the homeopaths and the flower essence practitioners and the this and the that and the other. And they all claim that their form of medicine, or they used to, I think things have changed now, but they would all claim that their form of medicine was the best. And I remember I studied homeopathy for several years. And at the school, I remember studying chamomile. And people knew that I was already a herbalist, which was a bit of a sort of, oh, you're a herbalist. And, you're dealing with sort of material substances and not with such subtle medicine as homeopathy. And we were standing in the lunch queue, and this woman came up to me and she said, well, I imagine now that you've learnt about chamomilla, the homeopathic remedy, I don't suppose you'll be wanting to use the gross substance. And I just laughed and said, gross substance? You think that little God-given daisy flower is a gross substance? That's not how I see it. I see it as the most beautiful flower. So I feel much more attracted myself to flowers than I do to little white pills. So although I studied homeopathy, I don't resonate with it, because I don't resonate with the little white pills. I resonate with the flowers. And so, and then flower essences. So homeopathic remedies and flower essences are more, they have a subtler vibration. And, it could be that if you were a practitioner of those, that you might think that the use of herbal medicines or essential oils are less subtle. They work on just the physical. But actually, you only need to look at the flower in all its simplicity to know that its very presence is healing on all sorts of different levels. And in a way, it doesn't really matter how you take it. It's actually the flower that is the healer. It doesn't really matter. Maybe you just look at it. Maybe you just spend time with it. Maybe you just grow it in your garden. So the easiest way to use flowers, of course, is in everyday life. In your food, in your herbal teas.
Can I ask you a question that's been put there? Because before you go on,
yeah,
Tina has asked that she's never been able to understand how single herbs or formulas, after a long time of being harvested, still contain prana. I wonder if you could talk more on this. So before you went too far, I thought I'd ask that one because of the homeopathic part that you've just said. So.
Yes, well, I don't know that I've got the answer to that question. I find that if you can see a plant deteriorate, a dried flower deteriorate over a year or, just months. And luckily, flowers come out the same every year so that we can pick them and we can get new sources. When you make things into a tincture, which is what is used in homeopathy, a mother tincture, then you capture the prana. It's stored in alcohol and water and so on, and maybe it preserves it for a lot longer. And it's, obviously in homeopathy, they're using mother tinctures that have been kept for years and it still works. So I don't understand how it still stays there. So I don't have the answer to that question, I have to say.
Thank you for trying.
So the easiest way then is in food and drink. So edible flowers has become quite a thing, hasn't it? So if you go to, restaurants all over the place and, books have become popular about edible flowers. And it's hard to think why they've suddenly become a fashion, because they've always been so beautiful. But at least I think the great thing is that there's more information around about which flowers are edible. And, all sorts of extraordinary things like daylilies and primroses and cowslips and all sorts of things that you might just think are flowers in your garden that then you didn't really dare to eat them. So I think now it's great to have this information around. I mean, basically, if you can use a flower as a herb, you can eat it. So here we've got nasturtiums and probably bits of mustard flower. And, you know, we can drink them as herbal teas. And I think a lot of people are taking flower remedies on a fairly regular basis, all sorts of different ones from their garden or whatever, without really realizing that they're actually having these amazing medicinal remedies at the same time. Because culinary flowers and herbs all contain, if they're used in cooking, rather than just as decoration, but if they're used in cooking, it's because they're aromatic, because they smell and they taste wonderful. And the smell and the taste is given to them by volatile oils, and all volatile oils have antimicrobial and antioxidant properties. And the antioxidant properties protect the body against stresses of all different kinds, and the antimicrobial effects ward off infections. And they're fantastic herbs for the gut flora because they improve digestion and absorption. They kill off unfriendly microbes in the gut, so they actually clear armor for the gut. And they make everything taste great, and they help the food to go down because they aid peristalsis. They're all what's called carminative, which means that they relax tension and spasm in the gut. They stimulate the flow of digestive enzymes. So they're much more than just sort of there for their taste. And obviously in the days before fridges, they were vital because they helped to, if your food was a little bit iffy and it had just been in the larder, they were really great because their antimicrobial properties could help you stop getting infections from things that might be a little bit suspect. So floral preparations, you can make infusions, you can make tinctures, you can make elixirs. Elixirs are half brandy, half honey, which taste amazing. Oxymels, which are cider vinegar and honey. And honeys, you can just infuse the flowers like thyme flowers, for example, in honey, really good for the chest. You can make them for all sorts of external things. So that picture is of, I think it looks like plantain and comfrey and marigolds and a little bit of self-heal that we were macerating in some oil, and we were going to make into a sort of heal-all balm. And then you've just put a little bit of beeswax with it when you've pressed it out to make it a little bit more solid. So you can make creams, you can make poultices, plasters, oils. You can infuse the flowers in oil, like St. John's wort flowers makes hypericum oil, which is just brilliant for nerve pain and sort of inflammatory joint pain and so on. You can use single plants, and then you've got your flower remedies kind of lined up that you can make. You can use either singly or you can make combinations, or you can make ready-made combinations. So if you know that, for example, I've made a ready-made combination here of the comfrey and the self-heal and the calendula, because I know that that combination together is really good for skin problems. But you could put little things together yourself for common ailments like coughs and colds and digestive problems or stress, insomnia, whatever. Like this old-fashioned cold and catarrh remedy, equal parts of peppermint, elderflowers and yarrow. That'll be the leaves and the flowers. So you can play around. So I was saying earlier that different parts of a flowering plant can be used as a medicine: the root, the stem, the bark, the seed. And they're parts of the whole of which the flower is the vital expression. And we were saying that earlier. It is the flower that displays itself in all its magnificence, not only to attract pollinating insects, which they do, well, that's one of their purposes, but also to bring its healing nature to the attention of mankind who has such need of its gifts. And that beautiful flower is a linseed or a flax flower. So I said this earlier, this is a picture of a tincture, or in fact, it's a glycerite that we were making. And we were making, I like to play around with floral art in the art of medicine making. So you can see there lavender and sage and marigold and chamomile. And so we were making a sort of mixture of what we found. And then we made a mixture of water and alcohol and glycerol. And glycerol is great for using when you're making medicines from things that taste and smell amazing, like lavender, like chamomile, like lemon balm, rosemary, because actually the glycerol brings out the aromatic properties of the flowers and makes it taste way better, but actually is really good for bringing out the volatile oils. So as I said earlier, it may be thought that the flowers and the essential oils impact our physical and emotional world, while homeopathy and flower remedies affect the more subtler emotional and spiritual realms. But I think, I wonder if anybody knows what this flower is in this picture. Flowers as herbal remedies and essential oils have powerful physical effects, partly explained by their amazing range of biochemical constituents. But their more subtle attributes live within their physical forms, just as our soul and our more subtle vibrations animate us in our human bodies. They're all there. So we can't say that just because it's used as a herb, that it doesn't have that spiritual vibration. It absolutely does. And the picture there is a dandelion when it's gone to seed. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, we had a few people put dandelion up. Well
Oh
done.
yeah, good.
So you did have like dandelion.
So each flower, just get to know each flower with its own particular unique energy and vibration, its healing attribute, almost with its own personality as a healer. Each flower has got its own healing story, its own healing attributes, and it doesn't matter which way you want to use it, as a homeopathic remedy, as a flower essence. And that was one of the, it wasn't that I set out when writing the book, The Healing with Flowers. I wasn't really setting out to prove that. I was looking at how flowers have been used in medicine. And I looked at how they're used in the myths and the stories, what their symbolism is, and tried to relate it to how it's used today in herbal medicine, homeopathy, as a flower essence, and in aromatherapy. And what I found, which really was exciting, was that actually it doesn't matter how you use the flower. It's the flower, and it's the story of the flower itself which binds its use and healing together. It's the flower itself, and it doesn't matter how you use it. So you can't be a homeopath or a herbalist claiming that my remedy works better than yours because I'm using it in this form. It's not. From my belief, it's not true. It's the flower itself that does the healing, and it's our resonance with the flower. And it's the unique wisdom of that flower that is the gift. Flowers, their beauty, their scent, said Pope, are all are but parts of one stupendous whole, whose body nature is and God the soul. Look around our world, behold the chain of love combining all below and all above. Night-flying moths and hungry insects, as well as the whole of mankind, continue to gaze on their beauty in wonder. So we're okay for time. Finding flowers for healing. How do we find them? Best way, go and find them yourself, because there's a very interesting book called The Business of Botanicals that you might have seen, and Seb knows very well, Anne Ambrecht, who did this amazing journey to look at, I think she was in a shop in New York or Boston or somewhere, and she looked at some herbal tea and wondered, I wonder how many hands those herbal teas or those herbs in that tea have been through to get on this shelf of this shop from where they were grown. And so she did a sort of research looking at how many hands the flowers and the herbs actually go through before they get put in a tea bag and on the shelf. And actually her story and what she discovered was quite scary. And unless you've got the best quality plants to start with, how can you possibly make a remedy that's going to be healing when it comes to making medicines? So if you want your remedies to be as fresh as possible, the best way, if you possibly can, is grow them yourself, because you've got the pleasure of growing them yourself. You're going to have that opportunity to gaze on the flowers and to spend time with the flowers, and then to pick the flowers when they're actually at their best. And you can see when they're at their best. You know that that's the best time to collect them, because you can know intuitively, and you can check it in books and so on. And foraging from the wild, obviously foraging sustainably, not to overpick, not to pick where there's not very many of them. Beware of where you're picking. You don't want to be on a busy path where dogs are peeing all the time and so on. So foraging and growing flowers is wonderful therapy in itself. And, you know, I'd really like to walk through that mountain with all those flowers. It would be amazing. Best way to learn about them is being with them. When you have your own experience of a flower or a herb, you will never forget it because it's your particular experience, and then you'll remember it with your experience. I definitely think that the flowers that I grow myself and the medicines that I've made here from the garden are the one that I resonate with much more than ones that I've just bought in from a supplier. So going out walking and foraging, Ralph Emerson said, "Many eyes go through the meadow, but few see the flowers in it." So even when we go for a walk, it's very easy to get caught up in our busy lives, and we'll be going through our to-do list, or we'll be thinking about what we're going to do tomorrow, and we're just sort of walking around, but we're not actually there. And we forget to just stop and experience the sheer joy of just being there in that moment, and that being there in nature. And one thing that foraging does, instead of, you know, it really gets you to engage with nature, because you're looking for the ground ivy or the elderflowers or the hawthorn flowers or whatever. And when you collect them, and then you actually, I mean, has anybody here collected hawthorn flowers? It is the most amazing experience. They are so beautiful, and you can spend half an hour collecting the flower. And you get, just by picking it and being with it, you get a real sense of what it's about. And then, you know, you could expend your time, you just sit and in quiet meditation with that plant, that flower that you're picking. And you'll get some huge insights and understanding of the plant that you wouldn't have otherwise if you just bought it in through, you know, a supplier. And the quality is going to be way better. Make your own. Making medicines and flowers that you've grown or gathered or sourced locally means you can be much more in touch with the remedies that you're using. Of course, this is elderflower, and we were making an elderflower glycerite with water and alcohol and glycerol.
Annie, can I ask you, while we're talking about picking all these flowers, somebody's just put up here, I'm sorry, I haven't got my glasses, and it says,
do you want me to look soon?
No, it says, what is your interpretation of pollen allergies and how to overcome them without little white tablets? And that's from Jane Pavela. Sorry if I've got your name wrong, but
yes. Well, I think hypersensitivities tells us something about your constitution, and it tells us something about your immune system. Doesn't necessarily tell us something about the flower, because, you know, we don't all get hay fever or pollen allergies. So, you know, it means talking to somebody about your immunity, what's going on with your immunity. The fact that you're hypersensitive or, you know, quite sensitive is telling us something about your constitution. It's probably telling us something about your gut, your mast cell activity, which relates to the gut. And so it's not necessarily the flower that we're talking about. It's more about your system in relation to the flower. And that's the thing that probably needs looking at. I don't know if that answers it, but there are great remedies for sorting out allergies and oversensitivities, like yarrow and chamomile and nettles and skullcap and what else? Lemon balm. So
I've got another one. Sorry, I found my glasses. Is it necessary to use alcohol in glyceride? Could it be made without and used in a shorter time?
Yes, you can. But you probably need to use 80% glycerol, 20% water. Otherwise, it won't keep. Generally, what I do is I use 60% glycerol, 20% pure alcohol, and 20% water. And if you don't have a license for pure alcohol, you can just use 60% glycerol, 40% vodka or gin or something. But otherwise, if you don't want to use the alcohol, then you can use 80% glycerol, 20% water. And you could, on the top of that, maybe put one drop of something like, you know, if you're making, say, a lavender glycerite, put 1 drop of lavender oil on the top of it, just to go like this over the top of the glycerol, just to sort of help to stop it go off. The thing about not having the alcohol there is they have a tendency to go off more quickly. One way to prevent that would be to dry it first. So I really enjoy picking flowers from the garden and drying them. And that's amazing because, you know, you can compare your own dried herbs with ones that you might have to buy in dried. And if they dry fairly quickly, they dry really well and you can keep their vibrancy. And then if you make those dried flowers into a glycerite, much less likely to go off, because it's the water content with the glycerite that causes it to go off, which is why, I mean, I use fresh herbs, but I also use dried. But that's why I'm very keen to use alcohol to stop things going off if I'm using fresh herbs. But dry them first and much less likely to go off.
Can I ask them, Annie, do you use a dehydrator or do you just dry them naturally?
No, I use a dehydrator. I've got 3 on the go practically all the time. You can get these great dehydrators. They're little round things. They're a few inches across, and they have about 5 trays. And so you can fill all the 5 trays. You might need to move the trays around, and you can leave them on probably at sort of midway heat on the dial. But some things dry more quickly, and so things like lemon balm and ground ivy you have to put on the low heat, but you get to know that, and you leave them on for 3-4 hours and you get wonderful dried herbs. They're brilliant and they don't take up a lot of space, and you can get them online for about £40.
That's great, because I know I was listening to somebody the other day and she was saying, beware with dandelion leaves, even though you think they're dried, the stem holds so much.
Yes, so that if you want to dry those things more quickly, chop them up.
Yeah.
And you know when they're dry because they kind of crinkle.
Yeah, they crisp up. Yeah.
But I did do an experiment, only a sort of organoleptic experiment, not using thin layer chromatography, or just using my senses. But I was not wanting to use dehydrators. I wanted to stick with my agar. And I've got one of those clothes dryers over the top of my agar. So I hung nettles, lots of bunches of them over the agar. And then I had a dehydrator that I dried a lot in as well. And then I compared them. And I have to say, the nettles from the dehydrator were way more vibrant green than the ones that I hung over the agar, because they dried more quickly. The ones that it took, the ones over the agar, even though it was the agar and the agar was on, they still took 2 or 3 days to dry. And in that, they lost some of their vibrancy, and they weren't anywhere near as vibrant green.
And that's in that vein, we've got someone saying, can they be dried in the oven with just the light on? I've tried them in an agar. They do, even in the coolest part, they go quite crispy and
no, I think I would get a dehydrator. I think they're brilliant. And
someone's asking, can we have the actual name or the reference to the small round dehydrator? Do you know which one you've got? I mean, what it's called?
No, but we might come to a picture of it later on. Or, oh no, maybe we won't. No, I've got absolutely no idea. But I could let you know.
Okay, we'll see if we can find that out, Maria.
Okay, so if we forage them or we grow them ourselves, or we've got a friend that grows them, we can know their source. We can know where they were grown, that they were grown away from busy roads, not contaminated by pesticides and other chemicals. We can be sure of their identity, that we've got the right plant, that they haven't been adulterated and mixed with other plants, which can happen, and that they're not bacterially contaminated. And we know that they were picked when they were at their best. So they're made from the best quality plants. Those are more glycerites that I was making in the background. So from garden and hedgerow to medicine, using the freshest plants, we can make the medicines with as much vital energy as possible. And that, you know, the quality of your remedies is going to determine the effects when you're taking them internally as medicine. So you can create your own still room. And there's a chapter in the book about create your own still room. And, you know, a still room can just be a cupboard. It doesn't have to be a room like this. If you don't have a big country house with a room like this, you can call a cupboard your still room, but you've got little jars of things that are sort of macerating. So you've got your chamomile or your lavender flowers or your, marigolds or whatever, macerating in alcohol or whatever, or that you've dried. And so you've got your still cupboard, you've got your little apothecary akin to a 16th century still room. And you've got things on tap when you need them. And actually, if you love playing with potions and lotions, it's great fun creating your own still room or your own apothecary. And then you can have things for cooking as well as for healing. And it's like having your floral medicine cabinet in the house. It's lovely. Flowers always make people better, happier, and more helpful. They are sunshine, food, and medicine for the soul. So let's look at a few amazing healing flowers. And of course, we're starting with rose. So look at all those amazing constituents. Phenols, phenolic acids and L-glutanins, amazing antioxidants. Antioxidants protect the body from stress, from free radical damage, and so on. The terpenes are also antioxidants. Flavonoids, again, antioxidants. Anthocyanins, antioxidants. The volatile oils, antioxidants, antimicrobial, and really good for the gut flora, full of vitamins and so on, and minerals. And this includes the flowers and the hips. And then some of its amazing action. Carminative means it helps to relax tension and spasm in the gut. And from an Ayurvedic perspective, we could say anulomana. Probiotic means it kills off unfriendly microorganisms in the gut. Hepatoprotective, so all those amazing antioxidants help to protect the liver from damage, from drugs, from stress, from all sorts of things. Astringent and sort of drying, but toughens up mucous membranes, toughens up the lining of the gut, so really good for leaky gut syndrome. Amazing nervine. I mean, it would be, wouldn't it? You've only got to look at a rose and you go like this. And so it calms anxiety, lifts the spirits, makes you feel good. It's an antidepressant, anxiolytic. Roses are cooling, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and amazingly analgesic. Exquisitely perfumed, heavenly, exquisitely beautiful, heavenly perfumed, most sensuous and romantic of flowers. Inspires love. This really is love in search of a word. Enhances well-being, and because of all those antioxidants, longevity. And it's got a history of being used by people like Cleopatra. She would be bathing in roses and ass's milk or something, but it was roses. Rose water is used to keep you youthful and to stop you getting wrinkles because it's astringent and it sort of tightens your skin. But it's all about being youthful and beautiful. This is a remedy for beauty. And when we were talking about resonating ourselves with the beauty of the flower, I think this speaks to that more than any other flower. Best known for its ability to heal in the realms of the heart. So any word that's got heart in it, downhearted, disheartened, broken-hearted, downhearted, whatever. When we want to express love and affection and cannot find the words to convey the depth of our feelings, a rose will do it for us. I once was asked, when I first wrote this book, Sue, the one that you've got, the Complete Floral Healer. And in those days, before the internet, when you brought out a book, you were asked to go on television and radio and be interviewed for magazines and so on. And when I brought out the book on flowers, I was asked to go on a program called The Good Sex Guide Late. And it went on at 2:30 in the morning, but luckily I was interviewed first and, before, so that we could film it in advance. And Toya Wilcox interviewed me and she sat me on a sofa that was, I don't know, everything was covered in roses and so on. And I was sitting on this rose-covered sofa, and there were ceramic roses in the vase in front of me, and there were roses in vases and so on, because this was about this, we were talking about flowers. And behind me, there was a thing that looked like a heart or a I don't know. So I was sitting on this sofa with this sort of heart shape behind me. And I said to Toya Wilcox, so am I sitting in a, is that another strawberry or a heart? And she said, Look again, Anne, it's a vagina. But anyway, she then said, so let's talk about roses and why roses have always been associated with love, and why do we give roses to people on Valentine's Day? And so I said this, you know, when we want to express love and affection and can't find the words to convey the depth of our feelings, a rose does it for us. And there's an American woman on the program, and she said, when I see a rose, and particularly a rosebud, I just think of my man's dick. She's just said, and she says it's phallic to her, and it kind of it reminds her of erotic love. So I don't know, you know, so seeing that picture, I just thought it reminded me of the Good Sex Guide late. Anyway, I digress.
Before you digress off of roses, somebody, Maria, is saying, what are the properties of rose hips, please?
We're coming to that.
Okay, we're coming to that, Maria.
Yeah. With the earth and the sky and the water remade like a casket of gold, for my dreams of your image that blossoms a rose in the depth of my heart. So rose hips, the petals and the oil all can be used to calm tension and anxiety, lift the spirits, dispel fatigue, very good for irritability and anger, reduce low self-esteem, heartache and grief, good for nervous agitation, really good for helping you sleep. So the flavonoids and the terpenes, as I said, were anti-inflammatory and antioxidant, neuroprotective and so on. Really good to promote sleep through their effect on GABA. GABA is the anti-anxiety hormone or neurotransmitter that's produced in the gut by the friendly bacteria. So it's really good for the gut. Decreases signs of aging, improves memory and eyesight, promotes nerve regeneration, which is really interesting, and decreases the formation of amyloid plaques in the brain. The tannins in the leaves and the petals are astringent, toughen up the mucous membranes, protect the gut lining from irritation and infection, clear toxins from the gut, and really good for the gut flora. From an Ayurvedic perspective, roses are a wonderful, they're a rasayana. It would be, because they're rejuvenative and full of antioxidants, and medya, and good for all three doshas. Really good for decreasing signs of aging, improving memory and eyesight. Excellent for reducing excess sattva pitta, irritability, anger, low self-esteem, depression, low spirits, and so on. We'll flick over that, all the different Ayurvedic actions. Cooling for hot inflammatory conditions, really good for inflammatory conditions in the gut, gastritis, peptic ulcers, enteritis, diarrhea, and dysentery, and so on. Really good for clearing armor from the gut, to regulate metabolism, and that includes weight. Clears excess pitta and armor from the rakta dhatu, really good for bleeding, inflammatory skin problems, used internally as well as externally, and for things like herpes, measles, chickenpox, and so on. Has an affinity, which we were not surprised by, with shukra dhatu, the reproductive tract, really good for clearing excess pitta and kapha and armor from the reproductive tract. Really good for uterine heat and congestion that contributes to things like painful and heavy and irregular periods, menopause. It's really good for hot flushes in the menopause. Really good aphrodisiac. So we were talking about those things, kind of the Good Sex Guide late, but the roses has always been associated with eros and love and that kind of sexual love, well, particularly the red rose. And it's called aphrodisiac. Now in Ayurveda, when you call something an aphrodisiac, it's actually because it's not purely for just heightening your libido. It's actually because it really nourishes the whole of the reproductive tract, the whole of the reproductive tissue. And it's really good for and it's for both men and women. So it could enhance sperm count. And it's really good because it's a heart remedy, as well as has an affinity with the female reproductive tract, or the reproductive tract anyway. It's really good for a whole lot of emotional problems that have to do with trauma around sex, and people that with, just feeling afraid of sex and all sorts of problems around sex. And it's really worth thinking about, and it's lovely used as a massage oil. So taken regularly or used as a dilute essential oil massaged into the abdomen, really good for period pain, salpingitis, pelvic inflammatory disease, cystitis, vaginal infections such as thrush, practically a great remedy for premenstrual tension, irritability and anger, and feeling suicidal, homicidal before periods. It's a brilliant cooling remedy to lift the spirits and really bring you back into harmony, and particularly because it works on all 3 doshas in the heart and the mind. The rose hips. So a syrup or a decoction of the empty seed cases, you need to be really careful with rose hips to take the seeds out, because they're very, very irritating. So if you're making a glycerite or a tea or whatever, cut them open and take the seeds out. They're a brilliant anti-inflammatory, really good and quite well known now for reducing pain and increasing flexibility in osteoarthritis. They have an affinity for the respiratory tract, pranavahashrotas, help to prevent and relieve colds and flu and fevers and sore throats and catarrh and colds and bronchitis, everything to do. They help, they stimulate the mucociliary escalator. And they're, of course, full of vitamin C, one of the most abundant sources of vitamin C, and also rich in vitamins A, B, and K. But they actually get, you know, they help to stop people getting infections just by their action in the here we are, enhances the mucociliary escalator, antimicrobial and decongestant, help to prevent and resolve colds and flu, sore throats, etc. Really good for people, especially those who live in cities or have a tendency to chest infections. And, you know, if you live in a polluted area, you live in a polluted city, something that works on the mucociliary escalator, getting all that phlegm up and all that pollution up and not sinking and settling in the lungs is great. So I know we've still got another quarter of an hour. I wanted to, everybody knows about roses, and I think another flower that people absolutely love are the dianthus family. So this picture is Sweet William, but also carnations and clove pinks. Lots of different dianthus species are used in medicine. And they also have a real history like the rose does of their symbolic use, which we'll look at to start with. So dianthus was the name given to these flowers by Theophrastus, who was the ancient Greek father of botany. And the word comes from theos, meaning God, and anthos, meaning flower. So they're the flowers of God, or the flowers of the gods. And there are various stories around why it's called the flower of the gods, and, you know, or goddesses. And there was a story about the goddess Diana, the Roman goddess of hunting. And there are other ones that relate to Artemis. And this is about a young shepherd who was in love with Diana. They're all sort of a bit sad stories. And she seduced him and then abandoned him. And his tears turned into the beautiful carnations as they fell to the ground. So it's about sort of tears of, it's about suffering and easing suffering, and about tears from the heart. So with the coming of Christianity, dianthus and lots of other flowers that have been dedicated to the Roman or Greek goddesses, they became sort of pagan. And so then a lot of flowers that were dedicated to goddesses became dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And carnations appear in many paintings of the Virgin Mary from the 13th century onwards, which now that we've said it, you'll probably notice. And according to Christian legend, carnations first formed from Mary's tears when Jesus was crucified. And then carnations came to symbolize the tears shed by the undying love of a mother in many parts of the world. So here, this is Leonardo da Vinci's Madonna and Child. Mary is looking pensive and handing a red carnation to the baby Jesus, who's reaching to grasp it. And a shadow, which you can't really see, but this is the story, a shadow is cast over the carnation, intimating the story of the Passion of Christ to come. So the meaning of motherly and divine love is encapsulated in this single flower, the carnation, that contemporary Renaissance and especially Christian viewers will understand. So this is a very good example of the symbolic use of flowers, because everybody in these days, they understood the symbolism of flowers. So if you put a flower in a painting, people would know what it meant. And they would say, well, this means the suffering of the mother and the undying love of the mother. So let's look at carnation first. And again, you know, if you know something about the ingredients of the plants, you can tell quite a lot from just looking at the ingredients. So there you've got triterpenes. They're the sort of part of like volatile compounds that are antimicrobial, antioxidant, and so on. It's got cyanogenic glycosides, volatile oils. Again, you'll see that it's antimicrobial. Look at its actions. It's a wonderful nervine. We're not surprised if something has been a symbol of easing the suffering of a mother. It's going to be nervine. It's going to be what's called thymoleptic, which means mood elevating, antimicrobial, carminative, otherwise known as anulomana in Ayurveda, analgesic. We're not surprising if it eases the pain and suffering of tears and so on, then it eases pain. Interesting hormone balancing herb, again, a bit like rose, diuretic, antioxidant, digestive, neuroprotective. So these antioxidants actually protect the nervous system from damage that might be caused by all sorts of things, but from toxicity. So these things that are neuroprotective are really good at protecting the brain from development of sort of cognitive decline and things like Alzheimer's. And it's interesting that carnations are really useful insecticides. This is a very quick poem that, because we're lacking in time, I won't read, but it's just about the symbolism of the carnation. So again, the carnation, long associated with love, weddings. So this is a buttonhole. People wear buttonholes, don't they, to weddings and maybe other events, but they'll usually have a red carnation or a white carnation. And it used to mean that they would be different colors for different things. So red carnations worn at weddings in China, exchanged on first wedding anniversaries in many parts of the world. They were used in France in bouquets to commemorate loved ones at funerals. So again, it's a flower of love. It was also presented as a symbol of distinction in school colors to graduates or recipients of academic and sport awards. So, you know, when students of universities, say in America or something, they'd go through an award ceremony and they'd wear carnations in their buttonholes. In Japan, it's a flower of good luck. At Oxford University, students have traditionally worn white carnations for their first exam and red carnations for their final exam. So, you know, they're to be awarded to you. If somebody's passed their exam or something, give them carnations. So the Victorian language of flowers is really fun. And it was a way of, you know, if you gave somebody a flower and everybody knew what that flower meant without saying what you were trying to, what the flower was about, people would know, so that you could give a flower to somebody and they go, this is what they're trying to say. It was a way of sending secret messages. Carnation is the flower of love and affection, strong emotions, popular for sending secret coded messages to suitors or secret admirers. Light red flowers, admiration; deep red, deep love and affection; white, pure love, fidelity and good luck; yellow, disappointment or rejection; variegated and love not shared; striped, regret; purple, capriciousness; pink, a mother's love. So carnations as symbols of love and distinction, you know, celebrating that person, are linked to the heart and feelings of self-worth. You know, you did it, you're great, fantastic, well done. A nervine, an antispasmodic and antidepressant to support us in times of stress. The relaxing effect, the carminative effect, is felt in the digestive tract, really good for digestive problems, particularly stress-related, wind and bloating, pain and spasm, IBS type things. Really good for regulating the bowels because it regulates peristalsis. Antimicrobial volatile oils. We know it's got volatile oils because it smells really strong. Help fight off infections, whether they're viral, bacterial or fungal. Regulates the gut flora. And in this way, if you regulate the gut flora, then you're going to be regulating neurotransmitters that are produced by the gut flora. And so that maybe it's through the gut flora that maybe it works on the nervous system. The most active compounds of the volatile oil may be thymol and eugenol. The thymol is in thyme and eugenol is in cloves. They're some of the most powerful sort of phenols or volatile oils that there are in herbal medicine. And so it's quite a powerful antimicrobial herb, and it's a sort of understated herb, I don't think, or flower, I don't think many people know about it. Really good for combating gut infections, including H. pylori, Listeria, E. coli, etc. Good for disturbances of the gut flora. Taken as a hot tea, really good for promoting sweating and bringing down fevers. good for balancing women's hormones, for menstrual cramps, PMS, and used for a whole range of gynecological problems. And its analgesic effect could be really good for painful periods and things like endometriosis when it's really painful, and also could be really good in childbirth to ease the pain of contractions. But it's interesting that it's such a good remedy for the gut flora. And of course, the gut flora has now been seen, one particular part of the gut flora, which is called the estrobolome, has been seen now to regulate women's hormones, or all hormones, in fact. And so your gut flora has a lot to say about what goes on with your hormones, and therefore has been implicated, a disturbance of the gut flora and the estrobolome particularly has been implicated in a whole range of gynae problems, including endometriosis, period pain, hot flushes, menopausal issues, and so on. It's cardiotonic. It has a cardiotonic action that supports the heart, promotes the circulation, really good for stress-related things like palpitations, high blood pressure, and so on. And it's a diuretic that helps with high blood pressure as well. So lots of antioxidant compounds that fight free radicals, that contribute to cancer, particularly colon and estrogen-dependent cancers. But again, its action on the gut flora could be useful there. Its protective effect in the brain and the kidneys helps to prevent free radical damage accompanying aging. So it's another rejuvenative remedy, a rasayana. The camphoride and flavonoid glycosides have an antifungal effect, and this antifungal effect has been used for spraying on herbaceous plants and food crops like tomatoes and sweet potatoes and bananas suffering from sort of infestation. And the flowers are elixateric, and they've been used in the food industry to stop food from becoming contaminated and sort of going off. So because they're so high in volatile oils. Then the seeds are antiviral against herpes, hepatitis, and HIV, and help to prevent and treat colds and flu and maybe COVID. And I'll just finish this because this is diantha. So this is the same family. This is the Chinese pink. So it's not a carnation, but it's still a dianthus. And it's full of amazing ingredients that I won't just go over now. But you look at the actions: bitter tonic, digestive, and acid, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, antiparasitic, great remedy for parasites in the gut, anti-cancer, another analgesic, hemostatic, stops bleeding, antispasmodic, like carnation, relaxes tension and spasm in the gut or everywhere, emmenagogue, brings on periods, depurative, cleanses the blood. So the whole plant is quite famous in TCM, and where it's called Chu Mai. According to TCM, it has bitter and cold properties, and it particularly benefits the bladder, the heart, and the small intestine meridians, promotes urination, drains damp heat. Damp heat can cause, acute urinary tract infections, breaks up urinary stones, and is used for genitourinary infections. It's a bitter digestive, cools excess heat and inflammation in the stomach, stimulates the bowels, really good for constipation, really good for all those sort of pitta type, heartburn, acid reflux, peptic ulcers, gastritis, and so on, inflammatory gut problems and constipation. Wonderful antibacterial, how it helps fight infections and parasites and disturbances of the gut flora, clears armor from the gut. And again, like the carnation, as a hot tea, promotes sweating and helps break a fever. The cyclopeptides have potential anti-cancer and antiviral properties, and the phenols, antioxidants, have antioxidant and anti-cancer actions. Used in Korea to treat skin problems, including eczema and tumors. Another herb, it's similar to carnation, really good for the female reproductive system, really good because it's hemostatic, to reduce bleeding in heavy periods and easing period pains. And in Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and China, it's used to cleanse the blood and check hemorrhages during childbirth or after childbirth. Great used externally as an antiseptic, and you could do the same with carnation. And these, of course, they look great when you add them to food. Decorate your food with carnations and pinks, grow them in the garden. They smell exquisite. But again, you can use them as an antiseptic. You could make a tincture of pinks or carnations, use them as an antiseptic for grazes and wounds and skin infections and so on. Anti-inflammatory, good for sore inflamed eyes and skin problems like eczema. So we've done 2 remedies and we've got 4 minutes to go. What I wanted to try and do here is we could go on and on, looking at how flowers are used, all sorts of different flowers are used. But, for the ones that, the other 60 something that we didn't talk about today, you can see in the book. And I didn't want to just go into the medicinal side of flowers. The flowers are so much more. And I think that the spiritual connection and the emotional connection and our kind of lifelong, going back ancestrally connection with flowers is really special and not to be overlooked. And so I don't really want to just see them as a source of medicine. I want to see them as a source of inspiration and beauty and connection with the divine. So I hope that I've inspired you to see flowers in a different way and maybe connect to flowers and just look into them, maybe the flowers in your garden, the flowers in the park, the flowers when you go for a country walk. You might see them in a different way. Stop and look at them, spend time with them, meditate with them and see what happens. Write a journal and see what happens. And then verify your own experience with what you might read about in a book.
Annie, we've got a couple of questions which I think we should cover. Maria has said, many flowers in gardens are cultivars or may have even been genetically modified. Should we plant our own from organic sources to make sure it's the genuine DNA?
Yeah, I think you probably already know the answer to that question.
We know the answer, but need to hear
Dear Sebastian, who might still be there, has got his earth song seeds, and so he's developing more and more seeds for amazing medicinal flowers and herbs and so on. And so he would be a great source of organic seeds and so on.
Yeah, because that's the next question, a good supplier for organic, authentic plants. Seb, are you there? Hello?
Well, his face is still there, but anyway, have a look at Earth Song.
Well, I'm here.
Oh, he is there. Yeah, have a look at it's Earth Song Seeds, isn't it, Seb?
Thanks. Yeah, it's Earth Song Seeds. I'll put it in the chat.
Yes.
Please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But otherwise, have a look online for other things. You can, but it's interesting about cultivars because I went into that. I looked into that as well. So if you really, when you're using things for, like there's nothing quite like Dianthus superbus, or it's got its own personality. It's similar to carnation, but not quite the same. And there are lots of other dianthus. You can look them up and you can check online. There are quite a few others dianthus that can be used medicinally. And a wild pansy. So we saw a picture of the wild pansy, the heart seeds that look like the little heart, and it's used for all sorts of things. It contains salicylates, it's an anti-inflammatory, it's really good for the chest and so on and so on. But actually somebody says, well, pansies, our cultivated pansies, do they have anything left? They do. You can eat pansies, you can put them, but they're not going to have quite the same medicinal effect, but there will be some medicinal effect there. It's still a flower. It's still got some, even though it's a cultivar, I think it will still have some medicinal benefit, but maybe not as good as the original thing. But there's a lot of information online as well, so it's worth checking out further.
And Seb, thank you for putting that into the chat box. It's there now for anybody that wants to see. And I think, Annie, yeah, I can remember I lived in Spain, and Semana Santa, the Easter parades, or when they bring the Virgin Mary out, she is just covered in carnations. And it always bewildered me as to, well, how come this was for that? And, there would be the ones that brought the Virgin out and she would have the red ones, and another church would have the pink ones. But they're still very much in touch with the language of flowers, which, I think we need to go on that journey. And that's why I love your book. I know I've got the old copy and I will get the new one, but it's not just a book about herbs and healing. It's just every flower picture and everything you've written tells a story. It really, it's the way I've remembered flowers, because it's just the way you've written it, and you just inspire the story of the flower, then helps you understand what they're going to do.
Exactly.
And I think to go out there in nature, get to know them again. But your book, I mean, yeah, please, everyone get this book, because it just really inspires you in a way that you could have all these other books, but they just don't seem to do it. I don't know what Annie's done and what she's captured, but it's like getting Annie and going and putting her into, this book has come around the world with me. It's been to New Zealand and back, and I just love it. I sit there and I just stare at the pictures and I love it. And I want the new one now, so I'll have to get that one.
Thank you, Sue. A friend of mine went to Barbados a few years ago, and she met some Rastafarians that were living in the forest. And they said, why don't you come into the forest and we'll give you a massage and so on. And, or if you need anything, and actually while she was there, she got ill and she got flu or something. So she went to go and see the Rastafarians in the forest. And there was a woman living in this Rastafarian community, and she said, oh yeah, I'm going to make you some brews. And she got some herbs and she was making her teas and gave us a massage and whatever. And so my friend said, well, you seem to be really knowledgeable about the flowers. She said, yeah, every night I read this book and I keep it under my bed. And there she was, in a Rastafarian community, and under her bed she brought out the Complete Floral Healer. It was great. But anyway, if anybody's interested in the book, and I don't really want to plug it, I just want to plug flowers more than anything else. But if you are, I've got it on my website.
I think that the book does plug flowers in a way no other book does, because it puts you back in touch. So we need to plug the book because it does, they go hand in hand, because you start to know them in a different way. And people, yeah, they're loving this, and they're all saying thank you very much. That's when I've actually got my glasses on and I can see and that they will order the book, or they have. People are asking, will you do courses? Well, Annie, I think you already do kind of tincture making and things at your place.
Oh, I do a 4-part, so 4 lots of 2 days, kind of foraging and experiencing herbs, and we learn how to make teas and glycerites and tinctures and pulses and all those kind of things. And it's on my website for next year. This year is already full, but it's on my website for next year. And so we use the garden. I've got masses of herbs in the garden, and we go out foraging, and hopefully by next year I might be able to walk again.
Well, let's hope so, because I know you've had a really tough time. Maybe we'll have to come and film you so more people can get to kind of see Annie, and we may even get somebody to push you around then if you get tired.
Thank you. No, I'm hoping by next year I'll be fully recovered, but anyway,
be dancing, so
I'll be dancing. Yes. Anyway, so thank you everybody for listening. Let me stop this share.
No, I don't know if there's any questions that anybody, last minute ones, but we've been going, it's been great to do it like this, and to have Carolina's putting up a poll for feedback, so that's just gone over your face on my screens. But if there's any last minute questions, we'll take them. But no, Annie, thank you so much. I know we ask you back again and again. It's like Sebastian, we know you just know so much, and you've got so much to share, and the energy from this webinar compared to the one we did in spring in lockdown when we were all trying the different flowers. Do you remember that one? Yeah. This has been a very nice, relaxed one. I think the flowers have come through a lot more, or it's this time of the evening and maybe we're all hungry, I don't know, but it seems very relaxed to me. The other one seemed a little bit, bit more chaotic. So thank you very much. We do appreciate that you come back again, and I know everybody else does. And we all wish you well on your healing journey, so that you can get in there and dig the garden again. Although Annie's looking for volunteers to help with the garden. Anybody out there that's in Annie's area?
Yes, I've had a bad accident and I can't walk. And so I can't garden either, because I can't really walk down the garden. So if anybody wants to come and spend a day in the garden helping, that would be delightful. So I did put on my website that I'm looking for volunteers, and I thought we might have put it on Instagram, but anyway, just to put it out there. If you know anybody that wants to come and spend a day in a very beautiful herb garden.
But I'm sure that that's the only way to learn, really, is to kind of be with you. So we've already got people up here. Tina's saying she would love to. Tina, you would love it.
Well, so there's the information about how to get in touch with me on the get in touch via the website. And we do have a little shed at the bottom of the garden that isn't the most comfortable, but is definitely sleepable in a compost loo.
Okay. That's great to know. Well, thank you very much.
Anyway,
Thank you
lovely to see you
everybody
all.
for being here, and yeah, look forward to seeing you soon, Annie.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Seb. Bye.